You are listening to the HYDAC podcast. In each episode, we share our knowledge with you in topics related to hydraulics and automation and control, from the basics to the current trends. Stay tuned. Welcome to this episode of HYDAC podcast. I'm your host, William Shaw, and on this episode, we will be discussing the digital transformation and Industry 4.0 in the context of the Australian market. This is the final episode of a three-part topic, and once again, I have HYDAC's Technical Training Manager, Mr. Paul Marley. Welcome, Paul, and thank you for coming into the studio again today.
It's my pleasure.
We have previously discussed Industry 4.0, digital transformation and the overall developments, trends and impacts on a global scale. Where does the Australian market fit into Industry 4.0?
Yes, the Australian experience with Industry 4.0 is different to that in Europe and other parts of the world as well. So Industry 4.0 got its gestation in Germany, and the German industries are very big in manufacturing. They're making cars with very little human interaction and so on. We've had a big change in the Australian industry in the past 5 years or so. So we've lost our manufacturing of automobiles offshore and all the supporting industries for them as well. So if you think of manufacturing, traditionally you would think of an assembly line and an automated assembly line such as one building cars. Well, we've seen a big reduction in that sort of environment in Australia. So if we are looking at Industry 4 and the context of Australia, it won't necessarily be manufacturing. Or if it is, the manufacturing is very different.
So when you're talking about a different Industry 4.0, how will that be different? Would you be able to explain that more broadly in terms of the Australian market?
The Industry 4 and the technologies that encompass that are the same, but the industry that we're taping it onto are very different. So essentially, as I said, manufacturing is very small. If you are manufacturing something, it isn't necessarily a car. Certainly food and beverage. So if you make, for example, breakfast cereal, you basically start with your raw ingredients, you cook up your batch, you packet it, you palletize it, and then you send it away. Certainly Industry 4 could be applied to every part of that chain. So from the goods coming in to the goods going out to everything that happens in the factory and the data that encompasses all of that. Certainly a very big focus for the Australian industry is mining and resources. So essentially, if you go to the news and they do the stock market and they tell you how things are going, they'll tell you how the big miners are going. It comes up always number one. Certainly there is spaces there for Industry 4, and it's been applied actually for a number of years. Interestingly, they aren't necessarily calling it Industry 4. They just call it getting on with the job. So the mining industry is, again, it's very mobile. So we're talking about mobile and stationary equipment. We're talking about above ground and below ground, and the contexts there are very different as well.
So when I think of Industry 4.0, I do think of the production and assembly lines that you've briefly discussed. When we're talking about mine sites, are these now mobile robots that they have in operation?
Well, they can be. Let's just have a look at the idea of a robot first. So, can I ask why are you thinking robots when you're thinking Industry 4?
Every time I Google Industry 4.0, we have a robot that comes up, or production lines of cars being built with the different robots that are assembling them.
Yeah. Okay. So let's have a look at what a robot is. So we described robots and cobots actually in our first episode. If you're listening along, unless you're driving, close your eyes and think of a robot. Okay. So I'm going to take a guess here. I think probably 10% of you thought of C-3PO, 10% of you thought of R2-D2, I reckon 2% thought of Rotwang's robot from Metropolis, and some people thought of BB-8, and everyone else thought of some industrial robot, like a welding robot or something like that, with an articulated arm. How many of you thought of a car or a truck? Now, if I'm in a food manufacturing industry and I have an automated mixing process, is that a robot or is that just an automated mixer? So really, what is a robot and what is not a robot? Fun fact, did you know that in South Africa, a set of traffic lights is called a robot?
So when looking at robots in the mobile industry, how does this be applied to mine sites, for example? Are there mobile robots? How does this take place on a mine site?
Essentially, for a number of years, they've been automating the extraction process. So a lot of large mines, particularly in WA that I've seen, have articulated haul trucks. So these are your trucks that are basically taking the ore from where it's being dug up to where it's being processed. And they're basically like automated cars. They're doing it by remote control. They have drivers involved that can basically intercede. Those drivers tend to be sitting in Perth, the capital city in Western Australia, and they're potentially thousands of kilometres away from where that truck is. So they're doing that. They're automating that because ultimately it's safer. A automated truck is less likely to make a mistake than a man or woman operated truck because the robots don't get fatigued. And doing the same haul run many times a day will be quite a fatiguing process. The robots don't get tired. But also the automation and the data collected during that process enables them to optimize the operation. So basically they're extracting more ore with the same amount of trucks because they're more efficient at doing it.
So is this driverless trucks and the data collection, is this all part of Industry 4.0 in the Australian industry or landscape?
Well, the answer to that one is both yes and no. So from our perspective, yes, absolutely. We're saying automation, data collection, remote control, remote access, these are all Industry 4 technologies. Those that are actually working with those systems on those mine sites and those that are planning them and optimizing those systems, they're just basically going to work every day. They're probably not even thinking of the term Industry 4. To them, it's just industry. So everyone has a different idea. Is the Industry 4 a valid term? Well, absolutely, I believe it is.
So you're saying that this is about connectivity and optimization. So it boils down to being applied to every industry right across Australia and globally.
Yes, absolutely, because looking at the statistics, manufacturing in Australia is about 5% of our industry. Mining is about 6 or 7% of our industry. So, there's a lot of things out there that we can apply these Industry 4 technologies to. Whenever we're moving freight around, whenever we're bringing in raw products or finished goods, sending them out, even once these products have been sent out and they're in the use by the consumer, they can still be collecting data and they can still be optimized and they're still in a connected world. So ultimately, there's a much broader picture there if you look up beyond just the factory of the future and manufacturing.
Last episode of this podcast, we discussed predictive maintenance and some of the methods behind utilising that data. How does this fit into what we've just spoken about?
Well, absolutely. Predictive maintenance is certainly a big focus from our particular industry. So, we in the fluid power industry, we make machines and we service machines. So the maintenance of those machines and the optimization of their processes are very important to us. We see a very clear link between the Industry 4 technologies and our broader industry as it existed before Industry 4. But going forward, I absolutely believe that these technologies are going to transform the way we do everything.
It seems to be that there's a lot of need to upskill a lot of people to be able to keep up with these trends. Are the universities and TAFE colleges doing anything to upskill people or including these as part of their courses?
Yes, absolutely they are. So there are university courses out there on Industry 4. So, for example, Swinburne in Melbourne are running an associate degree on applied technologies. The metal trades units are being also expanded to include Industry 4 technologies as well. And with regards to people's knowledge and their skill set, people are going to have to learn more. A term I've heard used with reference to Industry 4 is that rather than have somebody as a single tool to do a single job, they really need to be multi-skilled in multiple disciplines. And an analogy I've seen used is they're like a Swiss Army knife. So if you want them to be able to do that, yep, they know that bit. They've got a component that is made for that. If they need to do that thing, they've got a component knowledge that will help them with that. So it's about versatility. And It's about certainly multidisciplinary skills across many different, what used to be diverse industries.
So just tying this all up, what would be the most out there or diverse thing that you've seen in regards to Industry 4.0?
There's a lot of different technologies that are used there. One of the technologies is machine vision. So this is where you have what was traditionally a video camera. So the computers are now aware of the images and they're able to process information based on those images. So one example I heard about was that this particular company had a lot of interactions between large mobile equipment and people. And there was incidents, accidents, and in some cases some fatalities. So they certainly were needing to keep the interaction between vehicles and people down. So there was exclusion zones set up. So they had lines painted on the road and so on. But in their environment, those lines didn't last very long, and people would just get sort of complacent if they weren't immediately clear. So what they did then is bring in some cameras, and the cameras would then have someone watching it, and they would press a button and sound an alarm if somebody walked into a certain area. Well, then they automated that process with the Industry 4 technologies so that the camera could pick up a person and sound the alarm automatically. And interestingly, they were able to bring their incidents down to a functional 0. So from a safety perspective, there's been some really massive gains there with Industry 4. So with Industry 4, safety isn't something that immediately comes to mind, but there's some real tangible benefits already with that.
Thank you, Paul. That is a very interesting discussion point and something I certainly wouldn't have thought of myself. That's unfortunately all we have time for. Thank you very much for your time today, Paul, and for everyone else, thank you very much for tuning in, and stay tuned for our next podcast. Thanks for joining us on this episode of HYDAC Podcast. For an in-depth learning on the subject you've just listened to, enrol on the technical training at HYDAC Australia. For more information, visit our website, hydac.com.au. HYDAC, global presence, local competence.